You wear a lot of different hats. You kind of need to do what needs to be done. So everything you know about them, you have to forget. I mean, I don't think it would be all the same because that would mean that we haven't learned anything.
Can you tell me briefly who are you and what you do at kimkim? Maybe some facts that no one knows about you at kimkim as well.
Interesting. So yeah, let's see. So my name is Chris McCarty. I'm the head of engineering at kimkim. I've been here for probably about just over 6 years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, we help travelers plan custom trips around the world, and we do that a couple different ways. But a lot of that involves building tools to either to help them plan their trips or help specialists kind of plan trips on their behalf with their input.
Mm-hmm. I see. So I have the chance to review the kimkim's page on LinkedIn, and it said that it is building the next generation travel company. Can you just give me some idea of what do you plan to do? Because like planning trip, it is very clear, and maybe you have some really great plans in the future. How you see the travel industry in the next few years?
Sure. I think some of it we're already starting to do, and we're seeing really good signs of traction. But I think it's really about, there's a lot of parts of travel that people enjoy planning themselves, kind of inspiration phase or kind of picking what's right for them, obviously
Mm-hmm.
going on the trips. But there's a lot of tedious parts as well with the logistics and making sure everything fits together and using lots of different websites to research and to find what's best for them. So we
Mm-hmm.
try to really take a lot of that time out of the planning process.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as an example, so I was at TripAdvisor before this for about 5 years. Yost and I, who's the CEO, we
Mm-hmm.
had built a previous company that was acquired by TripAdvisor, and we then built out their whole mobile apps team for about
Mm-hmm.
5 years or so. And that's a very do-it-yourself product company where
Mm-hmm.
you kind of already have to know what city you're going to, what dates, and then you really get into like what are the best hotels for me, the activities, restaurants, things like that. But a lot of people start their planning process even before that. They might have no idea. They might have a destination in mind, and that's kind of where we start. We don't really start so much before that,
Mm-hmm.
but they might not know, when's a good time to go. How many days should I visit Iceland for? I heard I can do the whole thing in 3 days. Is that true? Well, you can see some great things in 3 days, but you probably want at least 7 to 10 days to really be able to explore a bunch of different areas. So part of it is just helping people understand kind of how to approach the destination, um, and then what's best for them. And so we do that by connecting people with specialists. There's a kind of a thorough onboarding quiz where we try to learn a lot about their travel preferences, their style, maybe their budget range, things they want to do. And we can use that to then match them to a person who then works with them to plan their trip.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to let the computer and kind of the intelligence do what it's best at, but then also let the human do what it's best at. And it can be really challenging to sort of try to parse text and figure out the sentiment of what they want. A human can kind of look at that and understand what's kind of reading between the lines, whereas it's really challenging for a computer to. There's just so much nuance and different context that you kind of just get it wrong a lot of the time.
I
So
see. Mhm.
I think what we do really well is we kind of pair the human with the computer, and we kind of let them both do what they do best.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, we're kind of expanding on there.
Mhm. And is it available in any country or it's only for the US citizens?
Yeah, our primary travelers are from the US, but we help people plan trips from all over the world.
Mhm.
Most of I mean, you can see from the website, it's all in English, for example. Some of that is also that it's kind of the common language spoken by all our specialists as well. So probably at some point down the line, we would have more kind of internationalization and stuff like that. But then you really need all this the specialists and other people to be able to speak those languages too. So it gets challenging a lot more quickly. So right now the US is a huge market. There's plenty and plenty of room to grow there. And that's kind of where our main focus is, but we do get travelers from all over.
Interesting, thank you. So I also noticed on Crunchbase that kimkim throughout its history has acquired more than 3 million in funding. And can you tell me about short history? Maybe maybe how the original MVP's product looked like. What were the core challenges during those times, or maybe currently with the creation of the product?
Sure. I guess I would say that we didn't necessarily, well, it's kind of an always an ongoing process. It's never going to be finished. There's always ways to kind of keep improving things as new things come out and whatnot. But we took our first booking on the site within a month of launching. And I think that was really important to really prove out that people actually want to plan trips this way, are willing to pay for it. I think one thing it's easy to kind of get sucked into is waiting, like, oh, it's not done yet. So like we'll launch it when it's ready. We don't want to launch it too early because people might react negatively. And then we lose our one chance. Like that's not really how product development works, or any sort of creative process. So much of what you learn is just the reactions of how people kind of take things, and you kind of figure out what things you thought were on the right track and what things maybe are important to you, but not important to your market, or maybe you're going after the wrong market. There's just so many things you really need to test your assumptions. So I think getting something out fast is important, and also making sure that people are willing to pay for it is another thing. It's one thing to ask a bunch of users like, hey, would you like a better travel planning product? Like, sure, everyone's going to say yes. And they can probably, if you ask them, would you like to be able to talk to someone who's local? They'd be like, sure, that sounds great. Would you like the expertise of someone? Yeah, that's amazing. Would you pay, more than it costs to plan it yourself? Well, let me think about that. But that's like, that has to be in there. Like you can't do that for less than it costs to plan your child. We're not a budget travel planning service. Like you get what you pay for. We're also not a luxury planning service. So we try to find a price point that's really fair for all the time and energy that the other person has to put into planning your trip for you. And so our market is kind of people that recognize that value of that time or of that expertise, and they're willing to pay a little bit more to make that happen. Now, as we keep growing, we want to expand to other types of travelers. There's ways where we can kind of reduce the time spent in certain parts of that process, or try to better match travelers to specialists, because in some ways, people are paying for all of the trips that aren't booked because there's time going to that too. So the better matching we can do, the better use of the more efficient use of time, and kind of the margins can kind of be improved a little bit there. In terms of ongoing process, that's still how we approach a lot of things. We try to have to move quickly and have lots of iterations on different projects. So we might launch something to a subset of users first, or just tackle one or two screens and see how people are using it before we kind of do a full-on redesign. Or we'll do something that's a little bit early and fully functional, but isn't super pretty yet, and we'll kind of follow on there if that makes sense. But everything's a choice. We have just a limited amount of time we can spend, and things we have to say no to a lot of things. So it's not just that we can't do everything we want to do. So yeah, that's kind of how we approach things now as well.
Interesting. And you mentioned at the very beginning, like about role of research. Is it also like always before they're releasing new features, for example, you make kind of user research, or it's mostly about just create and test, or it's ask, create, and test? It's in short.
Yeah, it really depends. I would say we do all of it, but not always for every single project, not always in the same order. It really depends. I think there's one school of thought that is the kind of talk to 100 users, kind of figure out what their main pain points are, try to group that and figure out kind of what would, and that's great for certain types of things. Maybe more for like hardware or kind of physical goods where you kind of have one shot at it. It's expensive to produce. things like that. But honestly, that just takes a lot of time as well. So you don't always have that luxury.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on the flip side, if you just build and capture data, um, you may be interpreting it the wrong way. There's lots of ways to interpret data.
Mm-hmm.
Someone, for some of our onboarding screens, people dropping off may be a good thing. Maybe we're pre-filtering people that aren't a good fit, that instead of discovering after they spend 10 hours talking to somebody, oh, this isn't the type of trip I want, we figured it out without involving anyone's time. That's a positive thing for us, not a negative thing. But if you look at conversion rate and the numbers lower, you would just think, oh, that's bad. Let's go back to what we had. So you really need to know kind of the context around how to interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
So we do a bunch of things. Sometimes we'll talk with a handful of people when kind of going in a very new direction. We might launch something and then see how they think. We might kind of compare that to what the data shows. We have a lot of our own opinions about
Mm-hmm.
things as well, which I think is important. You can't just only rely on data, because then you kind of get stuck. You'll get stuck in certain places, or if everyone just kind of did that, you would never have these kind of big leaps ever, because you would never kind of allow yourself to make a big enough change to kind of see it from that perspective. So I think those are all tools to use and to kind of know when
Mm-hmm.
to use them, but we don't necessarily prescribe to a format of like, okay, next quarter we're going to launch the new thing. So for the first 2 months, we're just going to talk to people. Then we're going to build 5
Yes.
prototypes. Then
Mm-hmm.
6 months from now, we'll finally launch. And then a year from now, we'll have data. And it turned out that like, oh, it wasn't really worthwhile. So
Mm-hmm.
we just kind of use it as we think makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you don't always get it right, but the hope is that kind of in aggregate, you get it right and kind of move in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. I see. Thank you. And I checked also your LinkedIn, and so at the very beginning you were growth and marketing, and now you're head of engineering. And like marketing and engineering, quite different things. How did it happen that from marketing to engineering? How is this like a special team structure at kimkim, or it just was your initiative just to try new roles?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think also just looking at the perspective of LinkedIn doesn't really kind of tell the story or the nuance. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm an engineer by training. I studied computer science at Stanford. Yost, who's the CEO, and I started a company while we were at Stanford. So I've been an engineer and an engineering manager kind of my whole life, but I've also um, been in small product and engineering teams and startups where you wear a lot of different hats. You kind of need to do what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so when I joined kimkim, I wasn't one of the founding members. I joined maybe 6 months later. I had just left TripAdvisor. I was taking a bit of time off. I had moved to Boston from San Francisco with my now wife. So I was kind of figuring out what I was going to do next. And I was in contact with Yoast to just kind of help out with a couple of small projects for the company.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty early on. So I was starting with some maps based stuff, which I have a history of kind of doing some map stuff in the past. And then there was a need to, this is going to make the path even weirder, but there was a need to kind of expand our Iceland offering. It was a growing destination for us. We didn't really have a partner there that was the right fit. So I was just kind of trying to figure out what we could do there, learning more about Iceland as a travel destination, how we can help travelers. Um, I traveled there myself to get a better idea of the different places and what to recommend, to meet with local companies. I eventually was spending part of my time planning trips for people in Iceland, becoming the
Mm-hmm.
local specialist, really trying to understand their needs.
Mm-hmm.
What part of that job takes a lot of time that we could maybe solve with a product and engineering. So I was able to kind of look at it from both of those perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then for a while, really focused on kind of the growth and marketing side. And a lot of that meant advertising, like SEM through Google. And a lot of that was very technical in nature. How do we scale a ad campaign to 80 destinations with thousands of different ad groups and bids? And
Mm-hmm.
so we built a lot of tools in house to kind of manage that and optimize that. Um, different kind of how we can improve the landing pages for that experience. So someone would go from Google to our page and not kind of question like, why am I here? It would kind of feel like this was the right natural place for them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so there was a lot there, and there was a lot of engineering to make all that happen,
Mm-hmm.
to build those tools and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. That's very
Um,
interesting
so
perspective.
I was always kind of doing engineering related things, but for to kind of serve that purpose a bit more.
Mhm.
And then kind of middle of 2020, the one of the co-founders who was the CTO at the time, who I'd also worked with at EveryTrail and at TripAdvisor, decided to do something new. And that's kind of when I stepped in to take on kind of what he was doing, which was kind of more pure engineering stuff. So that's kind of how that path kind of made its way to the engineering team.
You have Ruby on Rails technology. What other technologies do you use, and what technologies do you see as a future in the booking industry, and why actually Ruby on Rails?
So why Ruby on Rails? There's a couple reasons. So one is that kind of the initial kind of MVP version was started before I was part of the company. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
know the full reason there, but we were part of a kind of accelerator, NFX. It's about networks, network effects. So, and I believe another group there that was working on a consumer facing product was using Ruby on Rails and kind of said, hey, this is great for getting stuff up to speed really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's great for early MVPs. I think that's kind of known in the industry. Like, yeah, I think a lot of people kind of take that too far and say, oh, it's a prototyping platform or framework. It's for MVPs, but it doesn't kind of work at scale. But that's kind of the reason we started with it. Um, and why are we still using it? Well, there hasn't really been a strong reason not to. Um, it's a big cost to switch languages, and until there's a really good reason for that, um, like that's what we would need to see. So a lot of other companies might have a Rails backend and like a React front end, for example. We haven't really needed to do that. There's some obviously some like UI benefits and other types of benefits. Maybe when you get larger to share components and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
but it hasn't really, at least we think, slowed us down not having that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and Rails has progressed a lot as a language in the meantime. So 2 years ago, we might have thought, oh, we'll probably at some point move to some sort of React front end or maybe React native as we expand to more apps. Now with Rails 7 and more, you know, turbo frames and some of those other things, stimulus are coming out. It's going to kind of solve some of those niceties we might have got with like a React front end. So that probably pushes that decision off a little bit longer of do we really need to do this?
Mm-hmm. I see.
Um, in terms of other technologies, so our stack, we host on Heroku. We use Postgres as a database. There's nothing super niche or fancy about what we do in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the kind of the tech stack side. I see it more as the tools we have to kind of build the product, and that's kind of the main focus: is what's kind of the right product, what's the right business for the travelers, and if we can get that done in our current code base, then that's great. We don't need to kind of chase the newest shiny thing just because people are talking about it. It needs to
Mm-hmm.
really solve a problem we have a lot better than we can solve it today.
Mm-hmm. I see. And in terms of future, or do you see the kind of emerging technologies that will dominate the booking market, the booking platforms, or you just up to the founders, up to the management?
Like what, for example?
Maybe like Python, PHP, like other programming languages, like,
Oh, sure.
besides Ruby.
I mean, maybe I wouldn't say it's up to the, quote unquote management. I mean, I'm the head of engineering. So if
Mm-hmm.
like the strongest voice would be mine, but I'm not the only voice and I shouldn't overrule people on my
Mm-hmm.
team.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if for those examples, I don't really see a scenario where all of a sudden one of those gets so much better. They're all kind of the same in a way, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. I think it's more if we kind of break things up into, you know, microservices, or we separate kind of the data crunching side from the display side, from like an apps side, so that we can reuse things. But honestly, I don't think I don't spend my time kind of predicting those things because one, they just change so frequently. Like if you look at, I've been in the kind of both the travel industry and the um, consumer technology industry for long enough to know that like when the iPhone came out, Facebook was extremely saying like we don't need to go native; it's all HTML. Like HTML is going to get better. It's going to be these hybrid apps. Then you go 5 years in the future, and it's like we were wrong. Everything needs to be native.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we haven't been able to create this bridge. It's too slow, or it just doesn't feel native. Then you go 5 more years, and it's like okay, now React Native is a way to do it, and we're gonna and then now just web apps are a bad thing again. So you just kind of if you're not using the right technology, you can wait a couple of years, and then you're magically using the right technology again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't think anyone can really predict what it's going to take in the future. I think it's gone back between native for just for apps, for example, native. It's gone back to hybrid. It's gone back to just
It's
um,
like it's
kind
like
of web app.
cyclical, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because each one gets like solves something that it was better. It's better now, or there's benefits. You want to have a small team so you can do stuff in both iPhone and Android, but then your team grows, and now you want to have dedicated teams because you
Mm-hmm.
don't want kind of a compromise. You want to take advantage of the best new releases in iPhone and the new releases in Android, and you need people who are only thinking about that because they want to be on the cutting edge. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, we'll kind of see in the future where we're at and kind of what our needs are, and that'll kind of dictate more of the technology we use
Mm-hmm.
versus the other way around.
I see. Thank you. And it seems to me you're for a long time in this travel and booking industry. So you first built EveryTrail, then TripAdvisor, now kimkim. How do you see the industry is evolving? So from this past 10 years, and what can we expect in the next 10 years, if it is possible? Your ideas.
Yeah. I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, there's a lot of things that um, I think the important things are the ones you don't that are kind of more slow moving that you don't really notice. There's all these fads that come up, and they kind of go off in weird directions, and then there's something that kind of takes hold um, later on. But it's kind of hard. I don't think anyone really knows it kind of while it's in the beginning or sees it. I mean, there are people that kind of claim they do, but for every one of them, there are 10 people that said the opposite that you don't really hear about anymore because they were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of just a survivor's bias type of thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I think there will always be improvements in kind of the full itinerary planning.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of people try to do a lot with AI. It's clearly getting better in a lot of ways, but there's also still situations where you just can't. The last little bit still feels a bit kind of awkward or wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and there's things that are just really hard to kind of train into it or teach it or take into account or understand that yes, maybe this person planned a business trip on the last trip, but they have a family and now they're going on a family trip. So everything you know about them, you have to forget. And there's just things like that that just take a while to kind of learn. So I think things that are um, getting better and improving, are things maybe that like I don't personally care or they don't affect kimkim and how we do things as much, but affect just travel in general or just life in
Mm-hmm.
general. More kind of ease of payments is a thing that's definitely progressed over
Mm-hmm.
time, and is getting better. It's getting easier. It's nice. QR codes for menus. I know 10 years ago or 15, 20 years ago, I feel like QR codes started coming out. They were kind of this, trendy, cool, weird thing. You needed to download a separate app to use it. There are very few use cases for it. It's kind of like, why can't I just like type in a URL? But now with like using them on menus and stuff and using them to pay your bills at restaurants is nice. Or the group, you just kind of all pay separately. And it's crazy saying that like in the US, that feels like a huge innovation, but like anyone who's been in like Europe or like literally anywhere else in the world is like known that you can just like tap a payment card to pay for something individually, or you finish your meal with your 6 friends and the person would come by with the handheld thing and be like, okay, you had the salmon, it's this amount you pay. You had this, and it's like that's been a thing for a long time. So, but I think things like that will be nice, especially in travel when you can handle things like you can show the menu in every different language, or maybe you can show pictures of all the different food items to get a better idea of kind of what the thing is. So those are kind of nice things. I think for other things around travel, like having your not identity, but like there's a lot of things you do. You check into a hotel, you have to show your passport and you have to fill out a whole form. And it's like, why? Like, can I just like give you access to the information that you need, not my whole history, but just the key details? Or can I just
Mm-hmm.
fill that in advance when I'm
Mm-hmm.
booking the thing? Or can my specialist send that on behalf of me in advance? Like the last thing I want to do when I arrive to a hotel after traveling all day, I just want to get to my room, or I just want to get out back outside and explore the city I'm in. I don't want to fill out paperwork. And yeah, I kind of hope that with a lot of the technology, it's there when you need it. So if you have plans for something and something comes up, there's an emergency or a flight gets delayed and you need to reschedule things, whatever, you can do that. But um, I think 5, 10 years ago, people really wanted, I mean, and this is what we built, right? Was a way to do, tours on your phone and kind of, and everything like that, which is nice to have that, to not have to, go somewhere else and buy a walking tour you kind of listen to. But you really don't want to, when you travel, you don't want to kind of be glued to your phone and technology constantly. So you want it to kind of help you as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think you kind of want to also be able to pick your head up and kind of be in the place that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I hope that it can be a little bit kind of smarter, easy to use, or maybe people just learn to use it differently,
Mm-hmm.
um, versus kind of depending on it to like be your guide for like literally every minute of the day.
Yeah, I see. Great ideas so far. And some last questions from me. What are your key priorities or initiatives for booking? So you mentioned artificial intelligence, and what about maybe some mobile technologies, app developments, improvements, UX improvements? But maybe like top three priorities or initiatives for the next couple of years. Maybe specifically for kimkim, for example.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for us, it's really just about how can we really make sure that people plan kind of the trips that they really want to have. Sometimes they don't even know what that looks like. So you can do so much like asking them questions and then finding things that match that perfectly. That's
Mm-hmm.
not always what they want. And that's something that a person can do really well. Like you say, oh, I want to do this, this, and this. Or on my last trip, this is what I did. And they can take that and kind of extrapolate and change that to like what that might mean
Mm-hmm.
uh, for their country. They can find similar things. They could also have some pretty good suggestions of like, oh, what about this? Like, this is a thing that's really, maybe you don't care so much for architecture, but you're going to Barcelona. And it's like, well, you have to see these Gaudi things because like that's a key thing here. And even if you don't think you like it, like you got to at least try it on here.
Mm-hmm.
Just because like this is the one place to kind of try that and like trust us, like give it a try. That's really that's something that humans do really well. So one just key is like how can we just help recommend the right things for our travelers and make it really easy for them to plan their trips.
Mm-hmm.
um, Another is how can we make it great for our specialists, make it easier for them to kind of plan trips on their behalf. There's just a lot of um, things they have to do for each trip that's kind of repetitive, or they have to pay really close attention because if they make a mistake, they may, quote the wrong amount, or they may forget to book something, or there's just a lot of human elements. And so how can we just reduce that, so they can focus on really providing the value that they can provide and not spending so much time kind of, filling out spreadsheets and filling out forms that kind of we can do on their behalf or like technology can do on their behalf.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another one that's kind of different from that is we focus a lot on the kind of the pre-planning side of it, but to do more kind of in trip while they're there. People don't always, schedule their full trip. But if they want to then add something in or kind of make a change, can we kind of be there for them on the kind of the more support side? Or if something does go wrong or the weather's bad, how can we kind of help change things for them so that everyone's happy, that, there's, it's not, you can't just cancel something like that person is expecting
Mm-hmm.
to get paid, or that guy is expecting someone to show up. So kind of it's challenging, but I think there's more we can kind of do just to improve that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And Yeah, I think it's just really just kind of focusing on the core cases is kind of what we're still prioritizing.
Mm-hmm. I understand. And basically, my last question, if you could go back up to the days when you founded the like you were the part of the company when the company just started, would you change anything? Maybe the tech stack, for example, you would use not Ruby on Rails, but some other technology, something that you would do differently, or it would be all the same like it is now?
I mean, I don't think it would be all the same because that would mean that we haven't learned anything.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably, I mean, I think it's hard to answer in like a single answer, but there's definitely things that, we in retrospect would have wanted to do sooner,
Mm-hmm.
or there's kind of stepping stones for stuff that maybe we would have tried to skip over a step had we known it
Mm-hmm.
was going to actually plan out that way. Now, when you're
Mm-hmm.
in it, it's hard to know because you don't really know that
Yes,
path.
of course.
You don't know you don't know what the next thing is
Mm-hmm.
to skip to. Um, so I think based on the information we had, the decisions we made were generally the right ones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't think I would. So it's hard to have changed too much. I think another way to answer is like we're still here and we're bigger than we have ever been. And a lot of startups that start around our time or after can't say that, especially after COVID. So I think it's a lot of it gives us comfort that we did do a lot of things kind of right to set us up, both to kind of get through that, which was really difficult, um, but also to then kind of hit the ground running and really grow once travel demand came back. And it's still
Mm-hmm.
coming back. It's definitely not back to where it is, but um, I think we were able to kind of hit that opportunity pretty well. Also, in terms of technology, I don't think so. I mean, it's hard to. I don't know what kind of other scenario we would be in if we had used a different language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think and if there is, then we would change it now, because it's
Mm-hmm.
always kind of, and I'd be saying the same thing 5 years from now. I was like, oh, I wish we did it then, but we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in general, it's more about kind of doing things kind of earlier or later, rather than kind of completely changing the course we are, because we are still here. So it is a really positive signal that like in aggregate, the decisions we made were kind of on the right track.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see. And what is the attitude towards outsourcing? Is it something that generally companies in the booking industry consider, or it's rather everything kept in-house?
Um, yeah, I can't really speak for like the general market. I do know
Based
that
on
there
your
are companies.
experience, like based on the company that you're a part of, let's say.
Yeah, so we haven't really well, I mean, it depends, I guess. So we kind of quote unquote outsource for a number of things that we do. Uh, it's not the best word for some things, but we have like our specialists that work with us. They're not contractors, they're not outsources, they're partners, but
Mm-hmm.
we don't do all of that in house. Also, we produce a lot of great content, and we work with writers who are great writers. We have some of that kind of capability in house,
Mm-hmm.
but we also probably aren't. It doesn't really make sense for us to be in a position right now to have a team of 30 writers in house as part of our
Mm-hmm.
company. But we
Mm-hmm.
do work with 30 or more kind of writers on an ongoing basis who have different specialties, different areas of expertise, things like that. So I wouldn't call that outsourcing, but it is kind of, but it's similar in a way. From the product engineering side of things, I've worked in the past with kind of outsourced teams or kind of uh, development shops or agencies and stuff like that. And I think it's great for certain types of projects. So if we were doing some new idea that we kind of wanted to learn a lot more about, but was maybe a bit separate from our core offering, I think that could be a great opportunity for something like that, because we wouldn't need to really train them up on how everything works today. So they have a lot more kind of ownership and autonomy and kind of can kind of hit the ground running.
Mhm.
But that just isn't the case right now. We just don't have something like that.
Mhm.
I think,
Mhm.
and if we're going to spend all that time really training up and onboarding and helping people understand like how we approach problems and how we decide trade-offs and the code base and everything, then we want people who are going to kind of be here for the long haul. And kind of, if we're going to invest that time, we also want to kind of get the returns on that investment, which is them helping train the next kind of cohort of generation and really being with
Mhm.
the company for a while. So that's kind of, we see that more as an investment than and it's a fortunate position to be in. Like a lot of companies, especially early on,
Mhm.
you can't make an investment for a year out or 5 years out because you don't know if you're going to be a company in a year. You need to get something out in a month because that's going to then get more users, or that's going to be the thing you need to then raise the next round.
Mhm.
And you kind of have to do, that's the only option you have on the table. But that's not the case for us right now, so we're able to kind of invest a little bit further down the road.
Mhm. I see. Thank you. And these are the all questions for me.